Chapter 17 Animal Court. In the basement of the old, majestic, and imposing Stratton County Courthouse, there was a dusty hallway with several neglected rooms off it. On the door of the largest of these rooms was a sign that said simply Animal Court. Inside, the room was filled with the county's leftovers, old folding chairs that were mismatched, an old battered table that the judge used as a bench, old semi-retired bailiffs who drifted from time to time, and an old grouchy clerk who was hard of hearing and despised her job. Much finer courtrooms existed on the floors above the basement. Theo had spent time in all of them. His favorite was the main courtroom where Judge Henry Gantry presided. He loved Animal Court too, because you didn't have to be a lawyer to argue your case. At the age of 13, Theo had already had several impressive wins before Judge Yek. The dingy courtroom and its contents may have been old, but Judge Yek certainly was not. He was about 40 with long hair and a beard, and he preferred blue jeans and combat boots to black robes and bow ties. He was hip and cool, and Theo liked him a lot. It was only a part time job. Judge Yek was allowed to play judge 4 afternoons each week because no other lawyer in town wanted to. Animal Court was so low in the ladder, no other lawyer wanted to get near it. Theo stopped by all the time. Animal Court was open for business from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m., Tuesday to Friday, and the docket usually included an interesting case or two. Sometimes, though, business was slow, and on those occasions, Theo would pull up a chair and chat with Judge Yek about the law school, other lawyers, the legal gossip around town, and especially about other trials. He sort of felt sorry for Judge Yek because he wasn't presiding over Animal Court. He worked in a small firm that was rumored to be somewhat less than successful. Boa constrictors, biting dogs, spitting llamas, dive bombing parrots, mail order pythons, rabid cats, wayward monkeys, pot bellied pigs, deadly spiders, descented skunks, wounded mountain lions, abandoned baby crocodiles, illegal fighting chickens, hungry bears, a demented moose. Animal Court and Judge Yek had seen it all. But he had never been seen a crowd as large as this. At 5 p.m. Wednesday's courtroom was packed, and the mood was tense. On one side there were the Boones, Mr. and Miss Boone, both fine lawyers in town, and between them sat young Theo. On the floor beside Theo was a familiar face, though the face, swollen and bandaged, looked a bit different. It might have been renamed Judge in honor of Judge Yek, according to Theo. Thought Judge Yek had heard the gossip that young Theo had remarked to several other judges that he had named his dog in their honor. Directly behind Theo was Ike Boone, a once prominent lawyer in Strattonburg who had fallen years later, hard years earlier. Crowded together behind the Boones were a number of friends: Woody, his parents, and two of his older brothers. Hardy Quinn, his parents, his grandparents, and several of his aunts, uncles, and cousins. Several of Theo's friends from school, including Chase and April, along with her crazy mother. Mr. Mount was there for support, along with Captain Malloy. Dr. Cole and Starr were there in case they needed to testify about Judge's injuries. Also from the office sat next to Dr. Cole. Along the back 2 rows were some of the courthouse regulars who tried not to miss a good fight. On the other side of the courtroom, sitting shoulder to shoulder and offering frowns and scowls that left no doubt they hated where they were at that moment, were the 4 men who had been arrested Sunday morning. The 4 men from Strategic Surveys: Larry Sampson, Lester Green, Willis Keith, and Gino Gordon. Seated behind them were wives and girlfriends, family members, and others. Seated in front of them was a hotshot lawyer named Maura Caffrey, also known in some places as more caffeine, due to her aggressive nature, jerky actions, and quick tongue. Like most lawyers in town, she had no desire to be in Animal Court. Placed between the 2 groups were the 2 young deputies, armed and in uniform. Judge Sheck thought the case might get tense, and so he asked for more security. Judge Sheck said, "All right, the next case involves some complicated issues. I think I understand the background facts and most of the charges. As of today, the four employees of Strategic Surveys, Sampson, Green, Keith, and Gordon, are facing criminal charges of assault, assault on a minor, and trespassing. These charges will be dealt with in circuit court, not here. I understand there is also a civil suit that was filed this morning by Mr. Silas Quinn against these four men and their employer. Again, that's another fight for another day in another courtroom. Judge Eck paused and looked around the crowded room. This court has jurisdiction over animals and animals only. By law, that includes issues involving cruelty to animals. I'm looking at a complaint filed by Mr. Theodore Boone in which he alleges that Mr. Larry Sampson took a 5-foot wooden survey stake and beat his dog, Judge, well, until he was unconscious. That sounds like cruelty to me. So I am assuming authority over this case. Any response, Miss Caffrey? Miss Caffrey stood with her legal pad and her reading glasses perched on top of her nose and said, Your Honor, we have filed a motion to dismiss these charges or, in the alternative, to move everything to circuit court. To which Judge Jack rudely said, Motion denied, and you don't have to stand up in my court. Anything else? Theo had seen this before. Hotshot lawyers appearing before Judge Yek with an attitude because they considered animal court to be the Bush Leagues. They usually did not fare too well. Miss Caffrey sat down and said, Yes, Your Honor, we would like to record a record of this trial. So we brought along a court reporter. Sure, Judge X said with a shrug. Animal court was not a court of record, which meant that the testimony of the witnesses and the statements of judges and lawyers were not recorded in any way. In every other court in the building, a court reporter or stenographer recorded everything electronically and by shorthand. Because the altercation between the boys, judge and the survey crew had led to so many legal problems, it was wise to move to start recording the testimony of the witnesses. Anything else? Judge Eck asked Miss Caffrey. Yes, Your Honor. I ask that you recuse yourself as judge in this matter and the case be assigned to another judge. Yek didn't flinch. On what grounds? I believe this particular dog passed through this court about 2 years ago and that you are responsible for him being adopted by the Boone family. Why is that a problem? Who else would handle such a matter? It's just that, well, it appears as though you might be too close to this dog. I haven't seen this dog in 2 years, Judge Eck replied, and during that period of time, 1,000 dogs have come through my court. Request denied. Can we start now? It was evident to Miss Caffrey and to everyone else in this courtroom that she was already on the judge's bad side. Things could only get worse. Miss Caffrey did not respond. Anything else? Judge asked sternly. She shook her head. No. Judge Eck said, Miss Boone, I believe you are acting as the attorney for your son, the owner of the dog, and that your co-counselor is Mr. Woods Boone, correct? That's correct, Your Honor, Miss Boone said with a warm smile. Then call your first witness. Miss Boone said, Theodore Boone. Theo stood, walked 10 steps, and sat in the old chair closer to the judge, who said, Raise your right hand, Theo. Theo did so, and the judge asked, Do you swear to tell the truth? I do. Judge X said, Look, Theo, I know you've been in my court before, but today's a little different. That court reporter over there will record every word, so I want you to speak clearly and slowly, okay? This goes for all the witnesses. Yes, sir, Theo said. Proceed, Miss Boone. Staying in her chair, Miss Boone said, Okay, Theo, tell the court what happened. Slowly and as clearly as possible, Theo told the story of the encounter with the survey crew. He pointed straight at Larry Sampson when he was describing the beating of Judge. He almost got choked up when he described how he scooped up his bleeding and knocked out dog and began running. And while he was running away, he heard the men laughing behind him. He looked at Judge as he testified, and he looked at his mother, father, Ike, his friends, and occasionally at the four men, of whom sat with their arms folded over their chests. A time or two, Larry Sampson frowned and shook his head as if Theo were lying. He told his story without interruption, and when he finished, Miss Caffrey declined the opportunity to question him. Hardy went next, then Woody. All three told the same story, all told the truth. The courtroom was quiet as they testified, and Judge Eck absorbed every word. Any more witnesses, Miss Boone? He asked. Not at this time, maybe later. Very well. Miss Caffrey, call your first witness. Without standing, she said, Your Honor, I call the defendant Mr. Larry Sampson. As the witness stood and sort of stomped toward the front, Judge Judge slowly rose from the floor and balanced himself on his three good legs and a broken one. He uttered a low growl, just loud enough for Theo and Ike to hear. Theo reached down and patted his back and hissed, Shh. Judge Judge relaxed but kept his eyes fixed on Larry Sampson, as if he would attack and draw blood if he were able. Mr. Sampson took the witness chair, promised to tell the truth, then almost immediately started lying. After establishing where he lived and worked, Miss Caffrey said, So, Mr. Sampson, you've heard that these three boys said, Tell us your version of what happened. With a smirk, his first words were, These kids are all lying, all three of them. It was Friday afternoon, and after a hard week, we were winding down. All of a sudden, these three kids show up on their bikes with their dog and start threatening us. That one there in the blue shirt, Hardy, he's the big shot, and he says on his family's land and so on, and he demands that we leave immediately. You know we were leaving anyway. The day was over, the week was over. But anyway, this smart mouth kid was giving us a load of crap about being on his family's property. Then the Boone kid pops off about getting us arrested for trespassing. They were jawing, we were jawing, but we weren't about to get into a fight with a bunch of little brats. Then Boone pulls out a cell phone to call the cops, and we yell some more. Finally, we tell the boys we're leaving anyway, and they get back on their bikes. The dog had been sniffing around, growling and such, trying to act bad. And anyway, when they take off on their bikes, the dog somehow got in the way, and one of the boys ran over the mutt with his bike. I didn't see it, but I heard the dog squeal. And when I turned around, there was a pile up with the bikes, and the boys, and somewhere at the bottom was the dog, who was yelping pretty bad. That's how the dog got hurt. Theo looked like he had been kicked in the stomach. From behind them, he heard gasps from Woody and Hardy. The entire Boone side of the courtroom seemed stunned, almost too stunned to think for a second or two. Their reactions were not missed by Judge Yeck. When Miss Boone finally caught her breath, she said, So, Mr. Sampson, you did not hit the dog or touch the dog in any way. I did not. She nodded suspiciously and looked directly at Judge Yeck. At this point, she could attempt to argue and haggle with the witness, but she was too experienced. Because he spent so much time in court, Miss Boone knew that with what was coming. The four men concocted a lie, which all four would stick to. Judge Jack would have to decide which story to believe, and Miss Boone had a hunch he would side with Theo. Nothing else, he said. Theo leaned over and whispered, Mom, he's lying. She just nodded. Woody leaned over to his father and whispered, Dad, he's lying. Hardy leaned over to his grandfather and whispered, Pops, he's lying. Call your next witness, Judge Jack said. As Will Keith walked forward, Judge Jack glanced down at Theo and gave him a quick wink. No one saw it but Theo. Mr. Keith acknowledged he was the supervisor, but did not want to talk about whether he had taken his crew onto someone's private property without permission. The trespassing issue would be settled in another court. As to the injured dog, he told the same story as Larry Sampson. No stick, no repeated blows, no real contact or controversy with the animal. The poor dog somehow got tangled up and was run over by one or more of the bikes. He didn't see it all and was perfectly vague on certain details. Miss Boone tried to pin him down on exactly where he was standing during the confrontation, but Mr. Keith had a bad memory. More lying continued with Lester Green, though his memory was even worse than his boss's. But he stuck to the story and placed all blame for Judge's injuries on a bad bike wreck. As he finished, Judge Yeck, who had been growling, visibly frustrated, sent a chill through the courtroom when he asked Mr. Green, Sir, do you know what perjury means? The witness looked confused, lost, then a bit frightened. The judge helped him along by saying, "Perjury, Mr. Green, is when a witness lies on the stand after being sworn to tell the truth. Understand?" "I guess so." "Good. Now you know the penalty for perjury do you know the penalty for perjury in the state?" "Not really." "Didn't think so. The penalty is whatever I want it to be. Up to 12 months in jail. Did your lawyer explain this to you?" "No, sir." "Didn't think so. You may return to your seat." The brief perjury discussion sent ripples of fear through the other side of the courtroom. Larry Sampson, Willis Keith, and Lester Green all exchanged nervous looks. Miss Caffrey was lost in her note taking. Mr. Boone leaned down to Theo and said, "They're going to jail." Judge heard this and flicked his ears. "Call your next witness, Miss Caffrey," Judge X said gruffly. "Mr. Gino Gordon." Mr. Gino Gordon suddenly had no desire to testify. He had trouble getting out of his chair, had trouble walking only a few feet to the witness chair, and he had trouble settling himself into it. If ever a witness wanted to flee a courtroom, it was Gino Gordon. "You swear to tell the truth?" Judge Eck asked. "I guess." "Yes or no, Mr. Gordon?" "Okay, yes." Before before you get started, do you know what perjury means?" Judge Eck's raising tone and sarcastic voice left no doubt he believed Gordon was about to lie, just like the rest of his crew. "Yes, I do," he replied, his eyes dancing around nervously. "And do you understand you can go to jail for perjury?" Before he could answer, Miss Caffrey said angrily, "Judge, please, he hasn't said anything yet." "I get that," Yek shot back. "Let's just say that I'm warning him, okay? Proceed." Miss Caffrey said, "Mr. Gordon, will you tell the court what happened?" Mr. Gordon looked as though he was suddenly paralyzed from the neck down, with only the muscles in his face able to move. They formed a faint, painful frown, one of complete confusion. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. He glared at Miss Caffrey, but he was looking for something in her briefcase. If he told a lie, he might go to jail. If he told the truth, his buddy Larry might get convicted, and his boss might fire him. He was finally able to mumble, "Well, Judge, I really didn't see anything." Judge Eck anticipated this and retorted, "But all three boys said that you were right there. How could you miss it? Are you being truthful?" "Well, you see, Judge, I really don't want to testify." "Smart man. Go back to your seat." The main door opened and two more deputies marched in and found chairs. "Any more witnesses, Miss Caffrey?" "No, Your Honor." "Miss Boone?" "Yes, Your Honor. We would like to call Dr. Neil Cole to the stand. He's the vet who treated Judge." Dr. Cole came forward and was sworn in. Miss Boone asked him to describe the injuries. Slowly and with great detail, Dr. Cole testified that Judge suffered multiple wounds to the top, sides, and back of his head, as well as two more along the top of his spine, and of course a broken right front leg. Miss Boone said, Have you heard of witnesses, Dr. Cole? What about the injuries? Repeated blows from a stick of wood or the rubber tires of a bicycle?" "I object," Miss Caffrey said. "Overruled. Please answer, Dr. Cole." Dr. Cole smiled, took a deep breath, and said, "It's absurd to claim the dog's injuries were the result of being run over by a bicycle. He was injured by several hard blows from a blunt instrument." Judge Yek looked at Miss Caffrey, but she had nothing to say. She had nothing else. "Thank you, Dr. Cole. Please step down. Anything else from the lawyers? Any more witnesses?" Judge Yek looked at his watch and continued, "We've been here almost 2 hours. Anybody got anything else they want to say before I make my ruling?" No one volunteered. On the Boone side, there was the general feeling that enough had been said, and across the aisle there was nothing but fear. Judge Eck looked at the court reporter and said, "On the record, please, I am presented with two very different versions of what happened. The three boys tell one story, the three crew members tell another. The truth is usually somewhere in the middle, but not in this case. I believe the boys, and I believe the crew members, Mr. Sampson, Mr. Keith, and Mr. Green, created a story designed to keep them out of trouble." He glared at the men and continued, I think you decided you could walk into this low courtroom, into animal court, and simply tell your lies, and all would be well. You're grown men. Therefore, the court would certainly believe you, or it would believe a bunch of kids. That is unfortunate. Lying is lying, regardless of who does it. And when you lie under oath in a court of law, you undermine our judicial system. You, Mr. Sampson, I find guilty of cruelty to animals, a class 3 offense because it involves the intentional infliction of injury. For that, I sentence you to 6 months in jail. Sampson yelled, 6 months? Are you kidding me? No. Would you like more? You're crazy, Sampson yelled again, and seemed ready to attack the bench. Two deputies stood quickly and lurked nearby. Behind Sampson, his wife began sobbing. I got a wife and kids, he yelled. Quiet, Mr. Sampson, Judge Eck demanded. I'm not finished. I also find you guilty of perjury and sentence you to 60 days in jail in addition to the 6 months. This isn't animal court. This is a kangaroo court, Sampson hissed. Get him out of here, Judge Eck said to the deputies, who grabbed Sampson, slapped on handcuffs, and half dragged him away. When the door slammed, Judge Eck glared at Willis Keith and Lester Green, both of whom were wide-eyed and paled. He took a deep breath. They weren't breathing, and said, As for Mr. Gordon, you are wise enough to clam up and not testify, so you'll not be going to jail tonight. Mr. Keith and Mr. Green will not be so lucky. I find you guilty of perjury and sentence you to 60 days in jail. We'll appeal, Caffrey said. You have that right, but as of now, they're headed to jail. Take them away. The deputies hurried around Keith and Green. When the handcuffs were placed, they led them away. As they walked past, Judge was on all fours, growling as loudly as possible. That's the end of chapter 17.